Nick, it's great to be back in the studio today. It was definitely a bit colder coming in this morning in that kind of autumnal weather. And actually, today got up, I was thinking, oh my God, 10 years since I had my first child. So celebrating Ryan's 10th birthday today. And it's funny how quickly a decade passes. And when you look at that kind of from a financial kind of perspective and financially planning, decades go by really, really quickly. So talk to me a little bit about tips that you would give to anybody that is looking to kind of financially plan for the future.
It's amazing how quickly time flies. Absolutely. Just in terms of financial planning, and the key kind of takeaways that I always say to people is the first thing to do is think about what your financial objectives are. Like, what is it that you're trying to achieve financially? Are you looking to try and buy a house? Are you trying to help your kids, like Ryan, to get to a stage where you can afford for them to go to third level education, be it where they are locally or even further afield? Or is it to try and retire early? They're the three main sort of cohorts that we generally find that people are looking to try and strive towards. And in relation to that, what I suggest is it's always worth trying to break it up into three different kind of pots, as I call them. I refer to the short term, the medium term, and the long term. And to break that down, the short term is really anything less than 3 years. And the reason for doing that is that it has a very specific kind of a type of vehicle that you need to save towards. You can't take, any form of investment risk when it comes to saving for short-term needs. If you're looking to buy a car next year, or as I said, if you're trying to raise a deposit for a house, that needs to go into a bank, but it needs to go into a bank that pays you good interest. And a lot of these online banks that we've seen recently can do that. The longer term, then, on the other side of the spectrum, tends to be helping people to get to a point of what we call financial independence. And we help people in Alpha Wealth start to plan towards typically around age 60, not having to wait until they are state pension age, which is 66. Everything in between, I would refer to as medium term. So that tends to be mostly saving for kids for third level. It might be if you have longer term aspirations for, say, saving for a bigger property or a holiday home in the future. And it's really important to understand those different parts and try and allocate some percentage of your earnings to each of those and just keep readjusting them as time progresses.
And this is, I suppose, where budgeting kind of comes into it, because even last night I was kind of thinking, okay, the last 10 years in Ryan's life have gone really, really quickly from, up to 10. And I'm thinking the next decade, he's going to hopefully be in college. How can I budget for something like that and plan ahead? And where is the best place for me to kind of save for those future eventualities, I suppose?
So financial budgeting, which comes across as being a really boring exercise. And sometimes when I talk about this, it really turns people off. And all I try and suggest to them is that the only way you can really get a proper handle of your finances is to understand how much money is coming into your household and where exactly it's going. And it's almost just like trying to, I suppose, get ahead and say, okay, if I'm earning, say, 4,000 a month net, as an example, where is that money being spent? Because the problem is that a lot of us have what I call leakage. It's this kind of life creep as we get paid more, may get a pay rise. We're going to see tax cuts in the upcoming budget. And generally governments have been doing this over the last couple of years. And we've not been allocating that money, in my opinion, probably correctly. We've just got used to the money and we spend it. So the purpose of financial budgeting is that it allows people to basically have a good sense of where their money's going. And I think it's really important to try and speak to a financial advisor, whether it's Alpha Wealth or someone else, just to help you kind of make sure that you are allocating your money in the right manner. And we refer to something called save first, spend later. If you want to save for a house in the next 2 years and you need a deposit of, say, 30,000 euros, you need to allocate somewhere in the region of about somewhere close to 900 euros a month for that period. And if you can try and allow for that in your budgeting needs, that allows you to meet that financial goal. And it's that type of thing. The problem is that a lot of people try and use this kind of one-fits-all solution. We have a financial budgeter on our own website, Alpha Wealth. I think it's a really good tool to use. There are some apps that people can go on to, like OnPost, have a really good money manager app if people are particularly under pressure when it comes to just trying to work out where they're actually spending their money. But to me, that's a real sign of, taking the first step.
And you talk about save first, spend later. When somebody sees their monthly paycheck, let's say end of the month, How much should they be allocating for kind of savings, and how much should they allow themselves then to spend?
We normally talk about this kind of 50, 30, 20 rule. So typically 50% of your money that you earn tends to go on what we call committed expenses. This tends to be the fixed expenses like your rent or mortgage payments and insurances that you bear, just basically things that allow you to kind of survive in essence. We then have this 30% of what we call kind of discretionary, which is the things that we enjoy doing. Obviously we may want to be going out, putting money aside for things like, expenses that we have to bear. The last 20% then tends to be on savings. And if we can try and kind of work towards loosely those percentages, I think you can be quite successful. And our role in Alpha Wealth is to help you break down the savings bit into the different aspects that I mentioned earlier, the short, medium and long-term financial objectives that you're trying to meet.
So let's say we have savings and want to invest that money, because a lot of people are talking about kind of investing still in, cryptocurrencies, ETFs. Where is a good place to invest if I wanted to explore that a little bit further? And, what advice would you give to me if I wanted to explore investment options with my money?
So we come across a lot of people who they understand that investing, particularly over the longer term, and the rule of thumb is that the longer you have, the more risk you should accept. One of the biggest failings we see with a lot of our clients is that, particularly when it comes to long-term investments like pensions, they take an inappropriate amount of risk. So some of them actually are taking not enough risk. And then when it comes to other forms of investments, and we've seen this become more and more common now, particularly it happened during COVID, where a lot of people were at home, they were seeing kind of videos about investing in the S&P, for example, and they've kind of want to sort of get a little bit more ingrained in this, but don't really know how to kind of go about it. Now, on that vein, I would say it's really important that you do get appropriate advice. The key thing I always say to people is that I have no issue with people investing in cryptocurrency as long as they understand the purpose of why they're investing and obviously the risks that are inherent. Cryptocurrency is a very high risk investment, and we talk about risk on a table. It seems very simplistic. It's almost like investing by numbers. But if you can understand, what term you have, and that's why the first question I always ask people is, how long do you want to save or invest for? If you've got, say, young children and you're saving for when they're 18, it provides a very defined kind of time frame as to what we can do with that money to ensure that you get the best growth. And there's so much information out there that sometimes people kind of almost have anxiety when it comes to trying to find the right investment choices. We feel very strongly as independent brokers that you shouldn't speak to a tied agent. In that regard, the likes of the banks, AIB, Bank of Ireland, are tied to only one insurance company. And I think that's obviously a failing on their part. The other thing is that it's important to recognize that there are a whole variety of different types of investment options. I hear a lot of people speaking about this 60-40 investment rule, which I don't personally subscribe to. I think the key thing always is, how much money have you got to allocate to that particular type of financial objective that you're trying to meet? And then it's a case of finding the best one. A lot of clients we come across have either bought a savings plan through one of the insurance companies, they may have gone directly or through a broker, and you see that they're paying way over the odds in fees. I think it's really important to try and manage the fees that you pay. That's a big erosion to the investment gains that you'll miss out on. And to understand the concept of what I call compound interest, where if you're making, say, 3% a year versus 1%, the cumulative effect of that over time is really, really powerful. Einstein referred to it as one of the most powerful forces in the universe. And as boring as that sounds, the point I always say to people is, make sure that your money is at least meeting inflation, because if it's not, you are losing year on year. And make sure that it's in the right type of account for the objective that you're looking to make.
So earlier I spoke about decades going by quickly. A decade ago, I was 36. I just had my first child. What advice would you give to somebody who is, let's say, 36? How much should they have saved at that stage in their life, and where should I be now?
It's a really good point. And again, we try and reference, different stages of the financial cycle, and I know sometimes we all maybe get put off by the fact that we're not putting enough money, say, for example, into our pension fund, or maybe we don't have enough saved up for an emergency fund or for children. And the point I make to that person in their, say, mid-30s is just think about from today onwards and what can you do? And you'll be surprised how much you can actually generate by just getting that mixture right of where the money's actually being spent. Try and reduce any, I suppose, excess. And this is why it's important to speak to a financial broker about not overpaying on your mortgage. Don't pay a cent more on insurance products than you absolutely need to. Think about, the, I suppose, what I call the leakage of your expenses. And once you can tie that down, the savings that you do, you'll be surprised of how quickly they accumulate. People often get, I suppose, waylaid by some of the figures that they read around the fact that even with the government's introduction of something called auto-enrollment, which is a government pension scheme that's coming into effect in 2025, and they might be worried that they don't either understand it or they don't even have a pension scheme. And I suppose the point of that particular scheme is that the government are just trying to get people to start putting something away towards their retirement years, which is generally a third of our lives. So you can see why it is important to address. But even if you put in a small amount over time with that compound growth that I spoke about earlier, you'd be amazed by how much you can actually achieve.
Well, in a decade from now, I'm going to be 56. So, I would hope at that stage that I'd be able to reduce, I suppose, my hours working. And I know you talk to people a lot about kind of phased retirement. Talk to me a little bit about that and what it actually means.
Yeah, so for everyone listening, I talk about a notion of financial independence. It's not exactly the same as retirement. It's basically the ability to either work less or change career to something maybe less stressful. Or indeed, for some of us, it may be that they want to just enjoy their later years. And the key thing I say to them is, what's your number? And what I mean by that is that if you have I suppose, a need for a certain amount of income, bearing in mind that we can get income from different sources. The state pension, for example, which is payable to most of us from the age of 66, provides a reasonable amount of income to us. It's about 14,000 a year at present, which accumulates to around 250,000 over the expected lifetime for most people. And if you can try and build up your own separate provision, which is why the government introduced an auto-enrollment, obviously, to basically bring an extra 800,000 people into that sort of pension arena. Again, for most people, I show them that with certain provisions that they make, and again, reassessing that on a continuous basis, generally speaking, for most people at the age of 60, it should provide them that ability to draw their pension funds and have some reasonable chance at starting to reduce their working hours.
So today's episode, we're talking about savings. Give me your top place to save for a short-term goal.
I personally use two institutions to save in the short term. For monies that I've accumulated, I put them into one of the online banks. It's a German one called Trade Republic. There's a plethora of them available, the likes of Revolut, Raisin, Lightyear, Bunk. Trade Republic works well for me. They pay currently the highest rate of interest for instant access savings, which is 3.5% at the time of this recording. And the key point is there's no fees or charges associated. However, for monthly savings, and again, all of us should be trying to aspire, even if it's for a minimal amount, to save for things that we want to do in the short term, like Christmas, holidays, and so on. And that goes into one of the current Irish banks, AIB, Bank of Ireland, who are currently offering 3% gross interest fixed over a 12-month period, but with access. And I think they are definitely something that everyone should be looking for when it comes to saving in the short term.
And in that medium-term bucket, where do I put my money?
I'm a big fan of the insurance companies when it comes to the medium term. And the best company and the company that I save my money into, particularly for kids' savings, is through Zurich. They have a savings product called the Easy Access Savings Plan. It's one that I feel very strongly about, with really good fund management of different types of funds for different types of individuals. The key point with it, though, is make sure that you get it at the lowest fee. In Alpha Wealth, we offer all of the money that people put into these accounts to be invested. It's really important to ensure that your accounts are fully invested and that you're paying as low a management fee that is physically possible. But the key point then is to make sure that you have an understanding about what these types of plans will be worth to you when you need them.
And the Alpha Savings and Investment Club, is this a medium-term account?
It is. So what we did was we introduced the Alpha Savings and Investment Club really to show people how they can do this in a really simple format. We are taking advantage of the Zurich plan currently. We may look to vary that depending on how the industry adapts, but it does give people this kind of opportunity for the lowest cost form of savings for that medium-term cohort.
And for anyone that is interested in putting money into a medium-term savings account, like the likes that you've just outlined, are there any kind of penalties with withdrawing your money if you need to in an instant? How accessible is that money?
One of the beauties of it, and we feel very strongly about this in Alpha Wealth, is that we want to give people the freedom to vote with their feet. And if they want to change or encash their policies at any stage, there are no penalties to do so. I would caveat by saying that generally, though, I would always advise people to take at least a 3-year time frame. The reason for that is that whilst there are no penalties, there is a certain minimal amount of risk inherent with all of these accounts. And if you do leave these plans within the first 3 years, there is a small possibility that you may lose. Now, if the plans perform very well from the get-go, that is not anymore the case, but it's just important to recognise. But the key thing is that you don't pay any fees going into these accounts and you don't suffer any penalties leaving.
And can people go directly to Zurich to set these plans up?
Unfortunately not. Zurich are a broker-owning company, and even if you could, you'd find that the fees are actually higher. And whilst that may sound counterintuitive, the reason for that is that the companies like Zurich and Aviva and the New Islands of this world, they don't want to deal with individuals. They want to deal with professional companies that provide them large volumes of business. And by doing so, they offer the economies of scale of reduced fees and also ease. The key thing is with these plans is we can set them up within a matter of minutes, mostly through DocuSign online. Some people still like to do the kind of personal touch, which we offer people both in Cork and Dublin. And it's really, an effective way of just getting started. That's the key takeaway from today is if you have the objectives and you understand what they are, just get started, even if it's a very minimal amount. And what you can do is you can build upon that. And as things hopefully get easier with tax cuts and with increases in pay and bonuses, you can apply more and more money to these accounts.
And lastly, I'm going to finish up on asking you that long-term bucket. Where do I put my money?
If you're in a company pension arrangement, typically you should use your company arrangement, but make sure you get appropriate advice on it, and typically independently, because unfortunately a lot of us don't really get appropriate advice, not when it comes to a scheme, particularly through our employer. But like that, there's not a one-fits-all solution. And the key message that I would give to everyone is have a financial review. I know a lot of people think that maybe you need money to speak to a financial planner. We offer financial consultations in Alpha Wealth at a minimal fee, and we always provide value in those, typically for less than €200 for a consultation. And it's money well worth spent, because it will do is it puts you on the right track. It's a once-off fee. There are no further fees and charges that people suffer. And the key point is that we provide this layer of independence for individuals to ensure that they get appropriate advice in all three of those buckets.
And is it ever too late just to set up a pension?
No, I set up a pension there recently for a GP who is still practicing in their mid-60s. So the point of pensions is, and we're going to talk separately on another podcast around long-term tax planning, is that it gets you tax relief. It's like a savings plan with a boost from the government. And that's why I would encourage people to at least embrace this new advent of auto-enrollment. But unfortunately, the government, with its good intentions, haven't provided the right type of pension product, which is why I'd suggest that people should be getting advice before they just enter it without knowing exactly what they're entering.
Well, thanks for today, and I hope the next decade doesn't go as quickly as the last.